So I'm quite excited today because I'm harvesting my first batch of main crop onions, and I've done a test this year and planted half of the bed to onions grown from sets, heat treated sets, the other half grown from seed. They're roughly the same density. It's hard when you're doing it from seed because they're modules, and the modules got 3 or 4 seeds in them, and sometimes only 2 grow on to maturity, and sometimes 4 do. So you can't get the density exactly the same, but the space is the same, and they're both planted high density. And so I'm going to harvest the first beds. I've got 2 beds planted about 2 weeks apart, and the results are roughly the same, just eyeing them up, but I'm going to do the first one. And it's quite interesting when we take a look at them, because immediately you'll see that the ones that were grown from sets, a lot of those have gone to seed, even though they're heat treated. Now, my immediate reaction to that is get onto the suppliers and get my money back. So I've done that. But the second reaction would be to name the suppliers. But in this case, I used 2 different suppliers, both heat treated sets, and both sets went to seed. So I don't think it's the supplier's issue. It's probably the wholesaler that the suppliers buy from. So I'm not going to name the suppliers in this case, but I've contacted them and I'll see what they say. So the second kind of observation is that I planted the ones that went to seed. Well, I planted all of them at the same time, but I planted them quite early. Now I know that red onions from sets are ideally planted a little bit later than you would plant, say, white onions, but I figured that given that they were heat treated, it wouldn't be an issue planting them a little bit early to line up with the planting dates of the ones that I grew from seed. And I suspect that that was the problem, because ones that I planted later from sets didn't go to seed, or not as many. A few did, but not as many. So I'm going to show you around now. I'll show you all the different onions that I've got growing, and I'll put up on the screen what the exact planting dates are, because I can't remember them all. And then I'll harvest the side-by-side bed, the first of them. I'll show you the second one as well, and we'll compare the results. I won't weigh them at this point because they're a bit unwieldy. But I think we can eyeball them and see what the comparative results are. And I'll talk a little bit about how I'm going to get those dried and prepared for storage. And obviously the ones that have gone from to seed, those are basically just harvested now, chopped up and put in the freezer, or used fresh within the next week or so. And I've got another video which is linked to my ebook, which talks about how I prepare them for freezing. So yeah, that's the thing with once they've gone to seed, there's really no point leaving them in the ground. They won't grow anymore. All their energy is going into producing the seed head. Even if you cut the seed head off, they don't really grow anymore. But I've left mine just so we can do this comparative analysis. So this is the bed that I'm going to harvest today. So this bed is the one that was grown from seeds, and all of those are multi-sown, as you can see, and 3 or 4 onions per module. And this one with the sea of seed heads is the one that was grown from the sets. So these are starting to fall over now, and they're a good size, so it's time to get those taken out. And we'll just take a look at these down here. So again, these are starting to fall over, and these down there were grown from the sets, and you can't see so clearly that a lot of these have gone to seed just because a lot of them have fallen over, but they're looking pretty good. I'm going to harvest those next week, and these are the ones again grown from sets, seeds, and there's not many of these that have got seed heads. So that's pretty good. Now this bed is another one that was done from sets, but in this case these were planted out in May, I think, when this bed came free, and they're interplanted into the parsnip bed. You can't see any there that have gone to seed, but that's because I've taken them out. So I think there was about 10% of that bed went to seed as well, but that's a lot better than this bed over here. So that's what's left. These are the ones that didn't go to seed. So I would say, roughly speaking, it's about 50%, which is even worse than I thought. And these are the ones that went to seed. So there's plenty of good onion on those. It's not a disaster. It just means a bit of preparation to get them frozen. And to be honest, Debbie really likes having, a dozen bags of frozen onions in the freezer over winter. It just makes it really easy for her. She doesn't always want to be preparing onions from scratch. So actually it turns out the results are a little bit closer than I originally thought. So these are the onions grown from sets that I considered to be good enough for storing, and we'll grade those once they're dry into the use first and use last sort of baskets. And these are the ones that went to seed, so quite a significant number of those. And these are the kind of rejects in that they didn't go to seed, but they split quite badly. For example, like this one, another one that split quite badly there. And so those will just get used in the next month or two. So that's the ones grown from sets. Now in total, there's 69 onions there, and so I planted 80, so I don't know where the others went. Maybe I pulled some of the ones that went to seed out and ate them, but I can't actually remember pulling that many out, maybe one or two. So it's a bit of a mystery. So obviously some of them died off. Anyway, that's the ones from sets. So here's the onions that were grown from seed, and hopefully you can see the comparison in terms of the number, both grown in an area of 1 metre squared. Now there were 140 onions that I counted. 10 of those were rejects. There's about 60 good enough to store, and then the remainder are here. I think there's 130 in total that are eating quality. So I was targeting 90 in that bed, so there must have been a lot of late germination, or must have missed a lot of modules that had 4, sometimes 5 seedlings in them when I only wanted 3. So that's definitely a lesson learned. Now I was getting a bit tired, I must admit, in May, so I probably didn't go back and thin these beds out like I should have done. But anyway, that's a lesson learned. So that, anyway, a huge number when from the bed grown from seed, and good sizes, slightly more variable in terms of the sizes here than the ones grown from sets, but then there's nearly twice as many onions here, so it's not really that surprising. So let's just quickly review, I think, the lessons learned from that. So the first thing is that sowing density. Now I was targeting 90 onions per square metre, and I think maybe on balance that was okay. I think I could perhaps go down to 80. I might get a little bit more consistent results if I did that. A little bit bigger onions. I'm not totally sure that I would though, and I think in order to test that we'll need to see the next batch that was sown a bit later, because they were sown at the same, or planted at the same density, yeah, so we'll see what the results are from those. So next thing in terms of yield, now I think sowing from seeds gives you a much bigger yield from the same area, but also a much wider variety of onion sizes. So if you're just growing all onions that you want to store, then you want a nice consistent medium-sized onion, and probably growing from sets or growing with wider spacing, so lower density with seeds might give you that, or less onions per module might give you that. If you want maximum yield and you don't mind a few small onions that you're going to use for the first month, through August and early September, and then you'll switch over to your storage onions, which is what we do, then it's great to have all of that extra yield. Buying heat treated onions is no guarantee that they won't go to seed, and growing from seed is no guarantee that they won't go from seed. If you get freak weather conditions like that really cold April, or maybe that really hot June, July, then maybe, who knows which of those, or whether those are in combination, cause so much to go to seed this year, I don't know. But it doesn't really matter, too much, provided you've got enough freezer space to just bag up, process and bag up the ones that went to seed. They're the ones to use first. Then the ones that are a bit small, or a bit, the split a bit or something like that, to use those second. So I think that's lessons learned so far now. As I said, we've got loads more onions to harvest and lots of interesting results from the next batches, where some of them, the ones interplanted into the parsnip beds, for example, they are all really nice big onions, and they're like a total bonus crop because I planted the same density that I normally plant with parsnips, and just getting extra bonus onions. Now we'll have to see what it does to the parsnip crop, but that'll be, it'll have to wait for quite a while to get that result in. But assuming the parsnip crop is as expected, then all those nice big onions planted really nice big spacing, really good. Now the yield is quite low, probably by comparison with the higher density planting that I've done for my main crop onions, but it's a nice bonus, and as I say, they all look really good, although again quite a few of those went to seed. And of course my main bed, which is 4 times the size of the one that I've just, twice the size of the one that I've just harvested, that was planted 80 onions per square metre, so a little bit lower than the one that I've just harvested. So we'll see whether that gives the results that I'm hoping for, which is a little bit more consistency in the sizing, a little bit higher quality, and let's wait and see.